Okay, hello and welcome to this PHP Basics video. The reason I put this in the Basics playlist, by the way, is mostly because there's only going to be one part to it. It's actually going to be talking about a fairly advanced topic, so don't worry too much if this makes no sense. Okay, so what I'm going to be talking about in this video is MySQL and MySQLi. So someone brought this up in a comment, and to be honest, it's something or a topic that I've been avoiding, because it's one of those things where nobody seems to ever agree on which is best, if you like, or which you should use. So MySQL and MySQLi are essentially two different ways of interfacing or working with a MySQL database, which is something we've used quite extensively in my previous videos, and will do in the future. So up until this point I've been using the basic MySQL sort of functions, and they are in fact sort of the old method, if you like. So they were introduced in PHP 3, I think, so quite a long time ago, and it's sort of a common argument sort of around PHP forums and the internet and all that sort of thing, that you shouldn't use them because they're old, basically. And essentially people tend to say that using the MySQL functions is less efficient than using the MySQLi class, which is object orientated. However, that's not true. That's one thing that I am pretty certain on. I'm going to be, you can quote me on that if you like. Pretty much all benchmarks show that they're basically the same in terms of speed, just for doing sort of simple queries. The performance difference comes from something called prepared statements, which is not something I'm going to be talking about in this video. That's something I'm going to leave for a future video. If you use those, you can get a little bit of a performance increase. Very, very small performance increase though, so not so it's sort of equivalent to, I don't know, defining a large array or anything like that. It's not something that should prevent you using the MySQL functions, if that's what you prefer, and that's something we'll come back to a bit later on. Anyway, so what I've got is these two scripts here. They're very simple. They just take some data from a database that I had for some reason quite a while ago. So the MySQL one, you can see it prints out this information like this, and these are just posts in a guest book. And apparently, I can't remember ever making this tutorial, but apparently I did, because here is where I've been talking about SQL injection. So not SQL injection, XSS injection. So I've gone from post 3, which was unsafe, to post 5, which is safe. So I'm not really sure when I did this, but you may remember. Anyway, and then the MySQLi version, which if I click on that, you can see it's essentially the same. So I'm going to sort of go through these and sort of code out each page individually, and then we'll just talk about sort of advantages of both, I guess, because there are advantages of both, and ultimately it'll come down to personal preference, which you prefer, and that's fine. You can, go with whichever one you like, but like I said, it's something that is discussed quite a lot, and it was brought up in a comment, and it is something that I have been avoiding, really. So I'm just going to give you my opinion on it, and you ultimately need to decide for yourselves. Anyway, that's enough of that. So let's just go back to the index page, and I will remove the code from these two pages, and then we'll get on with, well, demonstrating our two methods. Okay, so prepare for a brilliant jump cut. Okay, so I've removed the code from those pages. As you can see, the size has changed. So what I'm going to do now is just open the MySQL one, and we're going to go ahead and code that page fairly quickly, because again, like I've pretty much always used the MySQL functions. When I say MySQL functions, I mean the functions that start with MySQL, like an underscore and then something. So for example, MySQL connect. So the MySQL connect function, as you probably know, takes 3 parameters, these being the server and the username, like that, and the password finally, like so. And then you call a second function to select the database, which for our little example is just called guestbook, and then that's the connection complete. So then you use another set of functions, so for example, well, not another set, a different function to perform a query, so MySQL Query. And in this case, the query we want to perform is a very simple one. It's just select post ID and post body from posts, except we don't miss the O out of from. Okay, And then to process that result, we need to use a while loop, and we obviously need to store the result of this query in a variable so we can use it with our fetch functions, if I learn to speak. So we're just going to create this variable called result here, set this equal to that query, and then we're going to loop over that result, so we're using a while loop here, so while row equals MySQL fetch a sock of results, and while that's not equal to false, we're going to just print the row, which is what I did in the example. So we'll just do print underscore r of row. Don't worry about this line at the top, by the way, too much. All that does is tell the browser that it should be treating this page as a plain text document instead of a HTML document, and that's just so that we get the sort of nice, formatted print underscore r output without having to mess about with adding any HTML. Anyway, if I just reload this page now, we should see that it's crashing, so that's not good. What have I done? That should be post ID, post body from posts. Oh dear. Okay, apparently I've done something silly that I can't see immediately. So I think what we'll have to do is just add a die MySQL error here. Oh dear. Good start. So let's see. Whoa, okay. Oh, I got my password wrong. Have I? Yep, example user. Pro. Okay, well, getting your password wrong aside, that is a very basic and pretty hard thing to get wrong, to be honest. And there we go, now we have the output. Okay, so now we've done that, I'm going to show you the sort of MySQLi way to do this. The I, by the way, stands for improved, because they made it better. It's not just object orientated, that's not the only difference as well, by the way. It does have a few more features, and I am going to mention those in a future video, just about the object, MySQL improved, and sort of talk about the various things that you can do with it that you can't do with the standard functions. But for this, I'm just comparing sort of the basics. That's the idea anyway. Right. So if we just go across to our MySQLi file, and we're going to write out the same code, but with the object-orientated style. So if we just go to this file here, the way we connect to the database, which was done previously with these two lines here, is now done with one line, and that is by creating a new instance of the MySQLi object. And this needs to be stored in a variable, so I'm going to create a new variable called MySQL, and this is going to be equal to a new MySQLi object. This takes 4 parameters, which are essentially the server, well not essentially, they're the server, so this, they're the username and the password, the next two, so example user, spelled right this time, and example password, and finally we pass in the database name to the connecting sort of function, if that makes sense. So you can think of this as the sort of MySQL connect and the MySQL select DB kind of combined. Okay, so there you go, that's our connection complete. And then to do a query, what we do is use the query method of this new object that we've created. So from the MySQL variable, we can use the query object, the query method, and we pass in just a string, which is the SQL. And so for the sake of saving typos, because I know this query is correct, I'm going to copy and paste this SQL here, because it's exactly the same, except we don't want the quotes to be messed up. Okay, and what this does is return a MySQLi result object, which we can then use to loop over all the results. So this needs to be stored in a variable, which I'm going to call result, like so, and then to loop over this result, we again need to use a while loop. So we do while row equals result, which is the result object, and then from this object we need to use the fetch a sock method. And unlike the fetch a sock function, the MySQL fetch a sock function, this doesn't return false at the end of the row, it returns null. So instead of not equals false, we just need to use not equals null. So very similar. And then inside of here we just have the same sort of style, where row is an array, exactly the same as is returned by this function here. So we can just do the same, print underscore r of row. And then if we go to our browser and go to the MySQLi page, if I learn to speak again and load this up, you can see that we get the exact same output as from the MySQL page. So now these two pages, or these two sets of code, are effectively doing the exact same thing. And functionally, to the database server, they are doing the exact same thing, and to the back-end sort of PHP stuff, they're more or less doing the exact same thing, except there is actually a little bit more work going on because of the objects we're using here, and functions are a bit simpler, if that makes sense. So, sort of, in a way, the MySQLi stuff is a little bit more complicated, and this is why so many of these sort of silly internet arguments spring up, because people are saying, but objects are more memory intensive, which is true, but only by like a few bytes, so it's a pointless argument to even have. I mean, you're going to get that variation even like loading the same script. You'll use slightly a different amount of memory, just because of various reasons I don't want to go into. But essentially, like I said before, it comes down to personal preference. By the way, again, like I said earlier, the MySQL code, so these functions, were created in, I think it was version 3. It was definitely done by 4. I think it was 3. They were added then, but that's not necessarily, that doesn't mean that they're bad. That's fine. You can use old code as long as it's been updated. These functions don't use the same code that was implemented with PHP 3. They've been updated with pretty much every version, so it's not like you're using old code that's bad. It's fine. That's another argument that is quite common, that you shouldn't use them just because they're outdated. It's not exactly like that. In some cases it's more convenient just to use the functions. In some cases it's more convenient just to use the sort of object-oriented style. Ultimately, I think the best way you can decide is if you are actually writing something that is object-oriented, the MySQLi sort of system is going to be more appropriate, or it's going to be easier, because you could store the MySQL, your connection variable, as a property of one of your objects or something like that, which is a little bit harder to do with MySQL Functions, because that creates a global sort of connection. That's sort of the other reason why the MySQLi system is a little bit better. It's because it makes it very easy to manage like multiple database connections. So say you wanted to connect to a different server for whatever reason, I don't know, probably not a bad example. Say you wanted to connect with a different user, you could just duplicate this line. You could call this, I don't know, user. You could call this admin, and then you could connect to the different user here. So you could connect with the root, for example, and you could use this as like your privileged connection, and this is your standard connection. I don't know why you'd really want to do that, but it makes it very easy to do that. Because say you want to do this query with the standard user, you just use this variable. But if you want to do it as the admin, you just use admin there, and it works in the exact same way. You can do that with the MySQL sort of underscore functions, but it's a little bit more awkward. What you have to do is store the return value of the connect function, and then pass it in as the second parameter to all of the other functions. So it's not quite as easy to do as with the MySQLi. But then again, it is possible. But the sort of most important difference is something called prepared statements, which I'm going to do a separate video on. But, like I said, the whole point of this is to just say that it's sort of a controversial subject, really, in that a lot of sort of silly flame wars tend to appear on forums of people shouting at each other and saying, no, you're not a very good developer because you use MySQL underscore functions, which isn't true. That's unfair, really, because, like I said, they've been updated. It's okay to use them. But generally it is considered sort of better to use the MySQLi object, but ultimately it comes down to personal preference, whichever you prefer. So yeah, I guess that's pretty much everything I wanted to say. So thank you for watching, and hopefully this was somewhat interesting, I guess, or at least entertaining, I don't know. Anyway, that's it. Thank you for watching, and come back for future videos. I'll try and do the prepared statements thing sometime this week as well, because that kind of follows on from this. So yeah, that's probably about 15 minutes of me talking now, so that will do.